All right. But what kind of Muslim? Because it gets even more confusing. Oh, it shouldn't be confusing, though. This is pretty straightforward stuff. Unlike Christianity, which has divisions, Islam has divisions, but they're not ideological divisions. That's kind of what I wanted to stress here. So, like Christianity, there are divisions. So, for those of you that are not Christians or don't know the Western European history story, or the story of Christendom, Christianity, as a single umbrella, has about, like I said, 1.5 or so billion followers in the world. But Christianity is actually a very generic term now. You usually wouldn't self-recognize yourself as just a Christian. I guess you would, but it would be more important you'd say, oh, I'm a Catholic, or I'm a Protestant, or I'm a Methodist, or I'm one of these 100 other divisions of Christianity. And it's important in Christianity because the divisions are meaningful. And I'm not trying to piss off any Christians here, but what I mean by meaningful is that Christianity used to be a singular whole 2,000 years ago. You know, this guy named Jesus was walking around and he taught some stuff, and then they built a Bible out of it, and there you go. And then it went into Europe, and they've had a pope and the head of the religion, and blah, blah, blah. It grows into a worldwide phenomenon. Well, everything was fine and dandy there for the first few hundred years. But by the Middle Ages, there were people in Christianity that were saying, hey, we don't really like this pope guy, and we don't believe that what he says speaks for us. We look at this text, at this Bible, and we read it differently, and we think differently, and we're going to act differently based on our own instincts of how we should worship God. That was a major ideological rift from Catholicism. And in fact, the two sides fought wars. So that's how you get the difference between Catholics and Protestants. Catholics are kind of the old school, this Pope guy's in charge, he interprets the Bible, we do what he says, or follow the rules that the Catholic Church sets about. Got it? The Protestants said, no, we like the Bible, and we're going to interpret it our own way, and we're not going to listen to those Catholic folks anymore. That's a major ideological difference, that the Protestants say, no, we don't believe that this Pope guy is in charge. That's a big deal. And these two teams fought it out in Europe during these holy wars that happened, reformations and counter-reformations and all this other stuff that made two different major divisions of Christianity. And the Protestants took it a step further, because once you open up the door to personal interpretation of the Bible to do what you want to do with it, that's why Protestantism isn't a singular whole. There's all these other things like Baptist and Lutherans and Methodist. All those are subdivisions of Protestantism because they're all interpreting the Bible the way they want to interpret and making up their rules along the way. Does that make sense? So Christianity has lots of different divisions, two major ones that are based on pretty profound ideological differences. The Protestants say, we don't have to listen to the Pope, we're going to talk straight to God. The Catholics would say, no, we have a hierarchical thing where the Pope's in charge. That's a big difference. Now, why did I just tell this big story of Christianity when I'm talking about Islam in the Middle East? Because there actually are two different flavors of Islam, but the point I'm making here is that I want you to write down is it's not an ideological divide. It's not anything like the great schism, the great division in Christianity. It's more, and I don't know how to say this without possibly offending some Islamic folks, but this is my understanding after talking with Islamic folks. It's more of a not ideological difference. It's more of a kind of more trivial nuts and bolts how you actually just do some things differences. I didn't say that very well. It's not very eloquent, but it's more of a how you interpret the actual practice. So they all of Islam, they all believe in all the big things. All of them agree on the 99% of the script. But the two divisions kind of arose early on of, okay, how do you follow the script? That's the main difference between the two main branches of Islam, and those branch names are Sunni and Shia. Sunni and Shia. S-U-N-N-I, Sunni, S-H-I-A, Shia. All right? So how did these divisions come about? The main point here is where they are geographically. But let me kind of define how they came about so you'll remember it better. It wasn't a big holy war like what happened in Europe. It was more that upon the death of the Prophet Muhammad back in, I believe, 632 AD, okay, so again, we're talking 1400 years ago, when the Prophet Muhammad died, he was the leader of the religion, okay? When he died, he did not have a clear-cut successor, right? So he didn't have someone second in command that he said, oh, this guy's going to take over when I die. To be the person that carries Islam forward and holds the traditions and explains things and is judge and jury, all that stuff, okay? He didn't have one of those people picked out. So when the Prophet died, a kind of fight broke out. This is typical. Anytime you don't have a clear successor, people are going to scramble and say, well, I want to be in charge. No, we want this guy to be in charge. Or we like this other guy to be in charge. And that's kind of what happened with Islam. So in the 630s AD, there was a kind of battle for control of the religion. And here's how you remember it. The Sunnis, Sunni side, the Sunni division, Team Sunni, said, okay, well, we are going to follow one of the Prophet Muhammad's main commanders, his kind of true second lieutenant, the guy who was kind of really beside him during all these wars of conquest and the formation of the faith. He had a right-hand man. We're going to follow the right-hand man who has no family relation, no family tie. He's just a good dude, good Islamic guy, been there the whole time. We're going to follow him. There were other folks, the Shia, Team Shia, who said, we think it should be a family lineage thing. And not to make fun of Shias, but that would have been a very predictable thing to say 1,400 years ago, because most folks lived for most of human history under a monarchy regime. So, whoever, that's like a royal family's in charge, and once the father dies, the son takes over. The prince becomes the king. So that would have been a logical thing to do as well. And the Shia said, well, there's this guy who's his cousin. We think he should, or maybe his uncle, I can't remember, help me out, Islamic scholars, tell me who was supposed to be the successor. The Shia said, we're going to follow this cousin or uncle of Muhammad. We think he should be in charge. And a fracas broke out. And there was some fighting, and actually there's some, I don't know much about Shia Islam, but there's one particular religious holiday where it centers around the death of Ali, who I'm pretty sure was Muhammad's cousin. So he was killed in one of these battles for control, and the Shia following still to this day recognize that as a big kind of holiday. I think they even men flog themselves, and there's pain and suffering involved. It's a very big deal to Shia Islam. It doesn't mean anything to Sunnis. Okay, so that's really what this division's all about, and that's really it. They mostly still pray the same way. They mostly still have the same types of mosques. They all do follow the Quran. There's not a whole lot of new religious text that Shias have that Sunnis don't, or that Sunnis have and Shias don't. That's not really the case. It really was, who did you follow, or who did you think should be in charge after the Prophet Muhammad died? So in the bigger picture, it's a kind of trivial difference. However, over the course of the last millennium, yes, some practices between the two groups have differed. Sunnis may do things this way, Shias do it slightly other. As I've just pointed out, Shias recognize this religious holiday, Sunnis don't recognize that. Sunnis may recognize something else that the Shias don't. You see how that works. This feels like a way trivia question, and I don't like trivia questions. I only like to teach you stuff that's important, but this does seem like a small fact, but go ahead and know it now. We'll put it on the test. One of the things that I do know that's different between Sunni and Shia is kind of the religious hierarchy. Sunnis don't really have a religious hierarchy. What I mean by that is the Pope is the head guy of the Catholic Church, right? Everybody knows that. You all recognize that. There's no Pope of Islam. There's no central figure. There's no world central hierarchy of Islam. It's one of the things that makes it really powerful, by the way. It's a very localized religion. Everybody follows the text, and they just kind of all do it everywhere, and you have a local mosque, and you go pray, and you have maybe a local guy that heads the prayers, but that's it. Shia does have a little bit of structure. Shia has actually a little bit more structure than Sunnis do. And here's the trivial fact that I wanted you to know. When you hear the word Ayatollah, that's a Shia thing. Booyah! Booyah! Maybe this already lightened up because you've heard of, oh, the Ayatollah of Iran. That's right, because most of these Shias are in Iran. The Ayatollahs are a religious class, a priestly class, kind of like a pope kind of guy. They don't have a lot of power, but they're a cleric class. They're like a high priest. And they do have a bit more structure in Iran, a Shia state, via the Ayatollahs. That is, they would say, oh, okay, well, we have a grand Ayatollah of our state, the head poobah, right? The Ayatollah of Iran, the head honcho who heads the whole government. But there are also other Ayatollahs that may have different regions of Iran that they're kind of in control of and would help set up mosque or assign people to do prayers at mosque. That type of thing. That is different. That's a Shia thing. There are no Ayatollahs in Sunni Islam. Got it? Okay. Again, sounds trivial, but it helps you, I think, hopefully understand the differences, particularly between Iran and all of its other Islamic neighbors, because Iran is mostly Shia. And that brings me to the real deal with what I want you to know about Islam in the Middle East and the wider world is what kind of Islam is where. Now you understand Sunni versus Shia, okay? And BTW, there have been fracases throughout history, very small, where Sunnis went and attacked Shias or Shias went and attacked Sunnis or persecuted each other. They're actually pretty minimal. Historically, they don't account for much. So I don't want to overplay this big difference because it's becoming bigger in today's world than it actually ever has been in the past, but maybe I'm getting ahead of the story a little bit. So I want you to understand these two divisions of Islam. But I also want you to understand it's not ideological, and it actually is not played figuratively in history. It's never been the case that there's been some huge Sunni versus Shia massacre or battles for control of the world. That's never happened. There have been some skirmishes and some slaughters, but pretty minimal. Again, not to get ahead of the story, it seems like it's getting more important in today's world than ever before, which is why I'm teaching it. Now let's get back to, okay, where are these guys at? This will help you understand the modern world a lot. It'll definitely help you understand the Middle East. Where are most of the Sunnis versus where are most of the Shias? Fact one to know. Overwhelmingly, the Islamic world, is of the Sunni branch. I'm going to make up numbers here, and I'm famous for doing this, but I like to round things off so they're easy for you to remember. When you're looking at the entire world, probably 90% of followers of Islam are of the Sunni branch. It is the overwhelming majority, right? Not just kind of a majority, overwhelming majority. When you walk down the street of any country on planet Earth, any, besides a couple I'm going to name, in Africa, Europe, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, America, if you bump into an Islamic person, 99% of the time, that's going to be a Sunni. Okay? All right. So, where are the rest? And by the way, this map is showing you the division here. The light green is Sunni. And you see all of North Africa, down the coast of Africa, most of the classic Middle East, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, most Gulf countries, all of Central Asia, most in Pakistan and India, all the ones in Indonesia are of the Sunni flavor. All right, that's easy to identify. It's 90% of them. Pretty much everywhere you go, you're going to be bumping into someone of the Sunni branch. So where's the Shias at? That's where it gets more interesting. The Shia group is very much more focused. And if you haven't picked this up already, they're mostly in Iran. So where I've now told you that most of the world, 90% of the world would be Sunni Islam and only 10% Shia. If you're looking at just Iran, you can flip that number. In Iran, 90% of Islamic folks are of the Shia branch, 10% of the Sunni. That makes sense, right? So Iran is really the epicenter. It's the core of the Shia branch, but it's not alone. Southern Iraq is overwhelmingly Shia as well. And for those of you that are already putting two and two together in your brains, because I love you, because you're smart, you might be starting to say, hey, wait a minute, is that why that Iran now has more influence in Iraq? Because Iraq, actually, the southern Iraq is mostly Shia, and those folks in Iraq have more in common with their buddies over in Iran who are Shia? Yes, now you're starting to get why it's important to know this stuff. Iraq actually is something on the effect of 50 or 60%, maybe 60 or 70% Shia. So actually, it's the majority in Iraq too. But Saddam Hussein, the dictator, former dictator, now dead in hell, and his whole government were of the Sunni variety, and they used to persecute the Shias. So enter the United States, kill Saddam Hussein, overthrow their government, make it a democracy. Well, democracy's great, we love democracy, but who rules in a democracy? The majority do, and the majority in Iraq is now Shia. So again, it's not like there's a holy war between Shias and Sunnis, but the Shias in Iraq now control the government, and they have more in common with and are more buddies with the Shias over in Iran. Starting to make sense, but they're not alone either. There are patches of Shias in most of the Gulf states. Yemen has a sizable amount. There's some in Afghanistan, in Syria, particularly the Syrian leadership. So it is kind of a big deal where these folks are for this reason. Wherever Shias are, go ahead and jot this down, maybe verbatim if you like. Wherever there are Shias on planet Earth, Iran has some influence. Say that again. Wherever you have clusters of Shia folks on planet Earth, Iran does have some influence. So Iran plays figuratively into Lebanese politics because there's a group called Hezbollah there, and Hezbollah are Shia Islamic folks. The leadership of Syria, that is al-Assad, who I've already shown you a picture of, he's not an outright Shia, he's actually an Alawite, which is a subdivision of Shia. That's right, you got it. And so Iran and the Assad family are buddies because they share the Shia link. And as I've now suggested, Shia-led Iran has a lot more influence in now Shia-led Iraq because of this shared cultural, religious thing. So it's kind of a big deal, and it hopefully starts to help you understand current events already of who likes who in the Middle East, who hates who, and what's going on. And I'm zooming into, I zoomed into the Gulf region just to point out a couple other things that are happening in current events that I could not let go without at least referencing. And that is that there are sizable Shia minorities and or majorities in places like Bahrain, which has seen Shia protest in the streets because the Shias say we don't have as many rights in Bahrain as the Sunnis, who are actually in the minority, but they control the government. It's very much a similar story to what was happening in Iraq. And people in Bahrain, and actually even in Saudi Arabia, say, all those uppity Shias that are protesting in Bahrain, they're being influenced by Iran. Oh, the evil hand of Iran is behind all of these protests. And Iran is funneling money and guns to Hezbollah, who's a terrorist group in Lebanon. And Iran is supporting the dictator al-Assad in Syria because al-Assad is a Shia, or a sub-branch of Shia. And there's actually Shias down in Yemen, and al-Qaeda's down in Yemen, and al-Qaeda must be a Shia influenced, and Iran must be funding them as well. You see, by the way, I'm not saying all these things are true. I'm saying this is the division that's starting to become more important across the Middle East. Quite frankly, it has nothing to do with the religion. Sunnis aren't mad at Shias because they have ayatollahs or because they are followers of Ali 1,400 years ago. No one really cares about that at all. It's more that Iran has a lot of Shias in it, and Iran is a competing force in the Middle East against, say, Saudi Arabia or other entities, and it just so happens they're Shia. So, again, I'm not saying this very eloquently, but it's important. There is no real major battle between Sunni and Shias. It just so happens that the teams that are fighting for power in the Middle East, the Shia or Sunni things helps define them. So it's Iran that's a big power player that's trying to gain power in the Middle East. And they're doing it via their Shia ties. Does that make sense? And Saudi Arabia and a lot of other Arab Sunni leaders really hate Iran. Not because they're Shia, they just happen to be Shia. And the Arabian team just happens to be mostly Sunni. Does that make sense? Maybe I'm saying the terms too many times. I'll let it go for now. We'll come back to it. And just so you know, there are some other religious groups. This is perhaps a better map of Sunni versus Shia religious groups just in the core Saudi Arabian Peninsula. But there are some Christians there. People forget this fact. Christianity actually is from the Middle East. Interesting side note that's largely forgotten. You know, Jesus and all those dudes, yeah, they were hanging out in the Middle East. They came up with their religion, and then it happened to flourish and proliferate mostly in Europe, and it doesn't exist a lot in the Middle East anymore. But there still are Christians there, as well as Druze, as well as Jewish folks. That we'll come back to that. Very critical exception here in just a minute. Now, before we get off of the Islam thing, we say a couple other things that while the faith itself has the Quran as a text, is its main text, Islamic folks would say that they are part of the Western religious tradition, meaning that Islamic folks would say, well, there was the Old Testament. Okay, the Jews came up with the Old Testament, and these were folks that prayed to a single God. And then Jesus came around, and him and his people wrote the New Testament, and they all prayed to the same God that the Jews were praying to. And now the Prophet Muhammad came along, and we now have the Quran, and this is part of the same tradition. Does that make sense? So, Old Testament, New Testament, what Christians would call the Bible, and the Quran, Islamic folks would say all three of these are legit. They're all part of a single lineage, all praying to the same God. So there is a lot of commonality between these three religions. And across Islam, worldwide across Islam, there is a lot of homogeneity with the text and with practices. I've now talked about Sunni versus Shia, but again, that's pretty minimal in terms of differences in practices and major beliefs. So they have a pretty homogeneous take on all this. But, of course, in different societies, it is practiced slightly different, and it's sometimes more liberal and sometimes more conservative within the society. I know that most of us in the West look at Islam and we're like, oh my gosh, they're all like, all the women wear these face coverings and burqas, and all the men have beards and wear turbans. And it's like, yeah, no. They have 1.5 billion adherents. The religion stretches from Morocco to Indonesia. Of course, there's different interpretations of how conservative we should take this religion and the culture that we live based on this religion. And some places are more liberal, some are more conservative. And this map is just showing you, and it's an old map too, but it still applies. It's just showing you how much the religion has influenced different laws in the state, just to show you the difference in interpretation. And so each little color code is a state law. Like green is seclusion of women accepted among religious groups. Some of my favorite are a white, which if there's a white piece of the pie there, that means it's completely acceptable to attack women for immodest dress. Blue is government-mandated dress codes. Oh my gosh, how well would that go over in America? The tan is women cannot drive in the country. The yellow is women need permission from a relative to travel. So these are things that we'd be like, whoa, oh my gosh, we're all about human rights and individual rights, and that sounds terrible to us, but this is a different culture, a different society, a different history. They think about things differently. But it's even different within the Middle East, because look at the map and see which countries have the most of these laws on the books. And of course, it's Saudi Arabia, the pinwheel of fun, where they would have the most conservative interpretation of Islam, and therefore have mostly conservative dress codes and conservative opinions towards the role of women and all these other things. So Saudi Arabia has all the rest of it. But then check this out. Tunisia. No, Tunisia's only got one color lit up. Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon only have women need male permission to travel abroad. That's it. They don't have these other things. They're more liberal in their interpretation of this faith, in terms of how the faith plays out politically and in the legal system. So don't think that Islam is this monolithic thing. It does have a lot of homogeneous traits. It is practiced kind of the same pretty much everywhere in the world, say unlike Christianity. However, there's great differences in how people interpret it for their own personal lives and how they interpret it differently for their societies. It is not that monolithic. The idea that every Islamic woman by state law must wear a burqa, that's nonsense. Maybe it's true in Saudi Arabia and Iran, but it's not for most of the other countries of the Middle East. Even of the Middle East, it's not true of all the countries. So if they have a difference of opinion, liberal versus conservative, of course everyone else in the world does too. Islamic folks elsewhere in the world do as well. One last point on this that'll be a test question. Why would Saudi Arabia have so many laws? Or they just don't like women there? What's up with that? Here's what's up with it. Saudi Arabia is where the religion was born. I've now told you the story. The Prophet Muhammad was from Saudi Arabia. The two holiest cities, Mecca and Medina, are in Saudi Arabia. The Hajj pilgrimage is conducted back to Saudi Arabia. Of course, Saudi Arabia is going to be, in fact, it's almost that they have caretaker duties to maintain as much as possible the traditions, the old school interpretations, the old ways of this world religion. It should not surprise you in the least that Saudi Arabia perhaps is the most conservative. But then you pop over to Iran, and they're pretty conservative as well. They have state-mandated dress codes as well. And I pointed those two countries out in particular. Saudi Arabia, the caretaker, all right, the main holiest of holy ground for Islam, overwhelmingly Sunni. Iran, a Islamic republic who sees itself as a staunch advocate and protector of the faith, mostly Shia. Why would Boyer be pointing those two out? Because those two countries hate each other. And those two countries are the kind of epicenters of these teams that are vying for power and control in the Middle East. Again, it just so happens that one of them Sunni, one of them Shia, and that plays into defining the different teams, but this is not a battle about religion. It's a battle about political and economic control and power, much like all great empires have fought over forever. But let me get away from that. I'm digressing now, getting ahead of the story of the teams vying for power. But do understand that Saudi Arabia, pretty conservative for now, I hope, obvious reasons. And they always will be. They always will be. The Saudi king himself, he's a king. It's a monarchy. He is not a religious person. I mean, he's a religious person, but he's not a priest, okay? He is really charged with being, not the leader of Islam, but the protector of the tradition. And so he himself, Saudi Arabia is not a theocracy. It's a monarchy. He's a king. But, buddy, if you don't think for 1 second that he has to bow down to the needs of the highest priest of Saudi Arabia, you're kidding yourself. So it's a very, it's almost the way that Europe used to be, that the Pope would go, say, crown Charlemagne, and be like, oh, I have the power vested on me by God to give you the crown, so you're the king. And then the king had to turn around and say, oh, well, I guess if you just gave me the power, that means you had the power, so I have to respect and protect you. See that symbiotic relationship? That's kind of the way Saudi Arabia is right now. He's a king, but of course he has to keep the really conservative kind of priestly class happy, because they could bring down his power, probably, so he has to kiss up to them a little bit, but they also kiss up to him a little bit because he's in charge of the state. Does that make sense? That kind of symbiotic relationship. Iran's a slightly different story we'll get to in a little bit. Now, of course, there's a huge exception, and I'm almost done. How long have I been going, Katie? I'm almost done, okay? There's a gigantic exception to this homogeneous trait that the whole Middle East is Islamic, because, of course, there's Israel. And Israel is not Islamic, and they're not Christian either. They're Jewish. That exception is so gigantic, and the state of Israel and the whole history of it is so important to what's going on planet Earth, that I'm actually going to pass by this slide and do a whole separate section for you just on it. How about that? Let's end this, though, with what's the last homogeneous trait of the Middle East? When we think of the Middle East, what do we inherently think of? Most Americans, I believe, would say, whew, conflict. Seems like people are just fighting there, and they've always been fighting, and we're fighting there, and there's American soldiers there, and there's NATO soldiers there, and there's UN soldiers there, and there's people fighting this, and Iran and Iraq had a war, and there's suicide bombers there, and extremists there, and yes, this is a region that is rife with conflict. And that's not even getting to the current events of the last 2 years with internal political dissent and uprisings and overthrowing governments and overthrowing dictators. This is a violent arena politically, and maybe it has been for a while. Before I even take the next slide, I want to apologize to all my friends from the Middle East who have approached me actually in the past and say, hey, boy, that's really unfair. It's unfair to say that our whole region is defined by conflict, because wars happen everywhere. I mean, China's had lots of wars, and India's had wars, and America's involved in lots of wars. And I agree. I say that is true. Every region we've talked about, and all the regions you've read about in the book, all of them have had wars in the past. All of them have multiple wars. Some of them are involved in current wars. But, no offense to my Middle Eastern friends, not like the Middle East. Quite frankly, you have every conceivable type of conflict that you could dream up is currently happening in the Middle East. Currently! And for the last 100 years. So where there are places do have wars. There's been a couple of world wars in the last 100 years. Only the Middle East as a region, looking at the whole, is the only one that I can identify on the planet that conflict almost identifies them. It's an identifiable trait. It happens so frequently and so consistently and in so many different ways that, yes, it is a violent arena. It is a region that conflict helps define. So I don't mean to offend anybody there, but it's a tough place. And they got a ways to go before they get out of the kitchen. And what am I talking about when I said that, oh, there's all kinds of different conflicts? Okay, well, we can kind of look at why countries fight, and that's a whole other lecture. Why would sovereign states fight? Hell, let's not even pick on states. Why do people fight? Why would tribes fight each other? Why would a small group of people go blow stuff up? Why do people take up arms and go try to kill other people? And there's a whole bunch of different reasons. The United States is currently involved in wars right now, and the United States would say, hey, look, it's all about security for us. We don't want nothing. We're not trying to take over territory. This isn't a religious war. We're fighting for security. Other times you might say, oh, okay, well, this war happened because this country just wanted to take something from another country. A simple resource acquisition. You might have other wars, like the religious wars of Europe that I talked about, where it's an ideological battle for control of the Christian faith. That's a reason to have a war. You look at the Middle East, and they pretty much got all of that, and ones we haven't even talked about yet. Namely, there are volatile and violent borders across virtually every single one of the core Middle Eastern states. Namely, you have current uprisings in Tunisia and Egypt, in Yemen and Syria, internal civil wars that aren't solved, political crises. You've had wars between Iran and Iraq, Iraq and Kuwait. You have an ongoing conflict with Israel and every one of its neighbors. You have an ongoing conflict between Lebanon and Israel, groups of people in Lebanon and Israel, groups of people in Yemen and the Yemenese government, people in Iran who maybe want to take over the Middle East, and people in Saudi Arabia who perhaps want to go crush Iran. And Israel is maybe going to go bomb Iran for having a nuclear facility. Those are just the ones I've named in 30 seconds. You also have more internalized conflicts, political but also ethnic, where there are groups of people within these regions that self-identify themselves as not Iranian, or not Syrian, or not Iraqi. Namely, these guys called the Kurds, who've been fighting for an independence, our independent Kurdistan for a while. And they've been involved in civil unrest, and currently are involved in civil unrest in parts of Iraq. So there's just so much going on, and I'm just going to name a few. I actually have started to name a few, but you can look at something like Territorial Clash. And we haven't talked about it yet, but I'm referencing it right up front. The fight between Israel and Palestine, and all of Palestine's supporters, is not a religious thing. Yes, most of the Middle East is Islamic, and Israel is Jewish. The religions have nothing to do with that fight. It's a territorial clash. Different groups of people want this land, and they're willing to shoot and kill each other for it, and they have been for 60 years. Okay? So we have fights simply over land. Land fight. Where is that even happening anywhere else in the world? Can you name any other parts of the planet where people are fighting over land? Most of the world's political borders have been firmed up for like 50 years now. Not here, not in the Middle East. So some entities are fighting just over land. Some entities have fought in the past and currently are fighting over resources. Namely Iraq. Saddam Hussein's Iraq invaded Kuwait. They just wanted the oil. He just said outright, we think that was our land and that's our oil underneath of it, and Kuwait is actually sticking a straw in the ground at a diagonal and tapping in oil that's actually in Iraq land. So we're going to invade Kuwait to get our oil back and take all theirs too. So, okay, so people fight over resources, namely oil, in the Middle East. There's also ethnic clash, and I've hinted at this. I do want to put out the ignorance alert. This whole time I've been talking about the Middle East, I have not, I've a little bit here and there been referencing ethnic groups. Now it's time to flush them all out so that you're smarter and don't offend anybody, which I'm sure I have multiple times. What's the ignorance alert of which I speak? There are many ethnicities across the Middle East. Islam is a homogeneous religion across the Middle East, but there are people, all right? People are religious, but they're not the religion. So there are different people in the Middle East. Most of them are Arabic. This is an ethnic group from, surprise, surprise, the Arabian Peninsula. Yeah, Arab people are from the Arabian Peninsula. What a shock. Oh, they're from a country called Saudi Arabia on the Arabian Peninsula? Yes, they are the majority ethnic group across all the Middle East, but their roots are in the Arabian Peninsula. And they have their own history and the way their traditions and their dress and their diet, that's part of being a different ethnic group. You have these self-identified things. During the height of the Arab Islamic Empire, which I've now already referred to, Arab people spread out from the Arab Peninsula to go across all of North Africa and further afield into places that are now Iran and Iraq, okay? So Arab peoples from the Arabian Peninsula do predominate most of North Africa and the classic Arabian Peninsula. And here's where it gets tricky. Most Egyptians are Arab. Most Sudanese in North Sudan are Arab. Most Algerians are Arab. And you're already like, wait a minute, I thought Egyptians were Egyptian. Yeah, they are. Egypt is a political entity. Algeria is a political entity. The people are ethnically mostly Arab. Got it? Okay? So look at those states. Most people in Iraq are Arab descent. Most people in Syria, Arab. Palestinians, Arab. Jordanians, Arab. Some Moroccans, Arab. Some Mauritians, Arab. So that's the main ethnic group. But they are not alone. And the differences are really the key to understanding a lot of the conflict in the Middle East. Namely, who else is in the Middle East that is not Arab? Okay, how about the Turks? I'll pick on them the first because I don't even count them as part of the Middle East, something I've said 10 times now. They're Turkic. They're the ones who formed up the Ottoman Empire. Turkic roots are actually from Central Asia. So these Turkic dudes from Central Asia, like 1,000 years ago, migrated into what's now Turkey and then created the Ottoman Empire. They're not Arab, all right? So they're different. They're both Islamic, okay? Most Turks are Islamic, most Arabs are Islamic, but they're two different ethnic groups. Two different languages, all right? So difference there. Also, we have Hebrew, and that would be most Jewish people are of this ethnicity, Hebrew or Jewish. You can count either one of them as an ethnicity that are centered in Israel in today's world. Look at that kind of green blob over there that's scattered throughout North Africa. Berber. Berber is kind of the core of Moroccan heritage, ethnicity, civilization, whatever you want to call it. The ones I've also already pointed out are the Kurds, the brown blob that is located in Syria and in Turkey and in Iran and in northern Iraq. These are a nation without a state. We've already talked about them in this class. And Kurdish are not Arab. And they're not Turkic either. These are distinct groups of folks. And finally, but without minimizing the importance of this group, is the Persians. Hopefully we've referenced this in different parts of this class, but Persian folks, and that is what we would call modern-day Iran, are not Arab. They have not historically been Arab. They've never been Arab. In fact, if you went back 3,000 years ago, the Persians are the ones that controlled most of the Middle East and were beating the hell out of people like Alexander the Great. So the Persians, centered in Iran, are a different ethnicity than the Arab. And both of those entities, Persians and Arabs throughout history, and even the Ottomans, the Turkish Ottomans, have controlled big parts of the Middle East, if not the Middle East as a whole. And these are all powers that in today's world, different groups in today's world, that might be vying for control or influence even now. Oh yeah, now hopefully you're starting to piece these things together. Oh, okay, even though I'm looking at the Middle East and it seems all homogeneous as an outsider, now hopefully you're starting to see that yes, there are some big differences from within that do explain a lot of the conflict, or let's just say friction, between different entities within this region. And of course, it's compounded with religion that I've now already pointed out, perhaps in too much detail. And political. I say combined with religious political clash. Let's just stick with the religion there for a minute. I've now told you, okay, Persians are different from Arab, and they have, contested for control of the Middle East in the past, and maybe they still are. They also are different religiously. So again, it helps define the teams. Iran is Persian and Shia. The rest of the Arabian Peninsula, or the vast majority, is Arab and Sunni. Oh, now we got two main teams, and this has manifested itself the most recently, I think, in the Iran-Iraq War, a war that broke out between 1980 and 89, where a lot of the Team Arab, as I like to call them now, with the backing of the United States, really hated Iran. We didn't like Iran. We thought Iran was getting too powerful, so we put Saddam Hussein, a Sunni Arab, we put him up as a shield and said, hey, Saddam, here's some money and guns. Go attack Iran. And that's exactly what they did in a bloody 10-year war where millions were slaughtered. It amounted to nothing, was the Iran-Iraq War. Again, this is a manifestation of these differences within the Middle East in a very brutal conflict. You also have Hezbollah in Lebanon, I've referenced, a group that its main function is to destroy Israel, I think. At least that's what they say. And they are Shia-based. And so Iran floats money and guns over to their Shia buddies in Hezbollah, who then launch rockets and blow up stuff in Israel. And that upsets not just Israel, but other Arab states who say, look, you're destabilizing Arab Lebanon with this stuff. There's internal conflicts within countries. And I always say, coming soon, Iraqi civil war. What I'm referring to in both of these instances is that there are folks throughout the Islamic Middle East who look at Iran and say, hey, they're like a theocracy. They're Shia, but you know what? They're a theocracy that puts Islam first. And they have a religious guy who's in charge of their state. And we kind of respect them because our political leaders, say here in Syria or in Egypt, really suck. And maybe we should become a theocracy. Maybe we should get rid of our leaders and become an Islamic republic, kind of like Iran is. That is what's going on all over the Middle East right now. That internal conflict. When you hear about the Muslim Brotherhood or the protests that are going on in the streets of Egypt right now, 2012, what is today's date? Like December 8th. Right now, Egypt is debating with itself and tearing itself apart, trying to figure out how to go forward, because there are people within the society who say, maybe we should be more like Iran. Maybe we should have religion in charge of the state. It's not the same religion. I mean, it's Islam, but it's Iran is Shia, and Egypt's mostly Sunni, but they say, hey, we like that system more. And the Arab Sunni leaders in most of the Middle East say, oh, hey, hold on now. We don't like Iran's system. I'm a dictator or a king. I don't want to be overthrown so that you can become a Islamic republic like Iran. That's what's going on all over the place, man. A battle for the heart and soul of political systems that has at its base a bit of religion and ethnic difference. Does that start to make sense? And that's why I say coming soon, Iraqi civil war. That's only a matter of time before Iraq devolves into full-fledged civil war. They have too many ethnic groups in the place and too many religious groups. So you have Sunnis, Shias, and Kurds in Iraq, and some of the Sunni, Shias, Kurds. Oh, let me back up. They've got Arabs, Arab, Persian, Kurd in Iraq. Then they also have Sunni Arab and some Sunni Kurds and Shia Persians and Shia. See how confusing it gets? You have these competing forces within Iraq in a destabilized state that maybe should have never been a united single sovereign state. And now that the United States is pulling out of there, it's simply a matter of time before the Kurds say, we want our own country. We don't like those dudes down there anyway. And the Shia-controlled government says, well, we don't like the Sunnis who persecuted us all these years. And the Sunnis in Iraq are already blowing stuff up, saying the Shias are going to pick on us, so we're going to blow stuff up now so that they don't get power. We don't want to be democracy. You see how this helps define a lot of the conflict inside of the Middle East. That's enough for now, though. Let me finish this with a quick round of what kind of Muslim. Time to play. You will have to know all these folks for the final exam, and you will have to know these things about these folks. Are you ready to play? Time to play Name That Muslim. I don't think that's too offensive. If not, I'll try to make it more offensive. Name that Muslim. And not just name the Muslim. You have to name the person, and you have to tell me, are they Sunni, or are they Shia, or are they Sikh? Now, Sikhs actually really aren't in the Middle East. That's mostly an Indian thing. Manmohan Singh, remember him? The Prime Minister of India? He's a Sikh. But it's an S word, so I thought it'd be fun. Also, with a twist, I want for all these people for you to be able to know, are they Arab or non-Arab? Now, again, this perhaps sounds trivial, but knowing who these people are helps you and if they're Arab or non-Arab, or Sunni or Shia, will help you in the long run understand what team they're playing on and who likes who and who's fighting against who. All right, you ready to play? This is just a handful of them. There may be even a few more on the final exam. Let's name this guy. Should be easy at this point in the semester. I hope that you can identify that as Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Whack-ass crazy Ahmadinejad. Right-wing nut Ahmadinejad. Where is he from? Iran. So he must be Shia, correct. Non-Arab, double correct. He's Persian. Next one. Oh, this one's a tough one. I don't even think I brought him up in class, but you know what? He will be on the final exam. This is Hassan Nasrallah. He is in Lebanon. He is not the leader of Lebanon. He is the leader of Hezbollah. As the leader of Hezbollah, as I've now pointed out, is an ally of Iran. He is a Shia. The Hezbollah group is mostly Shia. And he's Arab. So he's not Persian. But because of the Shia tie, Hezbollah is friends with, allies with, and gets money and guns from Shia-dominated Iran. How about this person? Oh, wait a minute. We're not even in the Middle East anymore. I know that guy. That's Bam Bam. President Susilo Bambang of, where do you think he's from? He's from Indonesia, and he is a Sunni. Again, when in doubt, if you go pretty much anywhere in the world and they're an Islamic person, they're probably Sunni. But I've now told you he's from Indonesia as well, so he's definitely not Arab. He's Indonesian. Or maybe he's a different or sub-ethnicity of Indonesian. I don't even know. But definitely non-Arab, not even from the Middle East. How about this person? Oh, there's the trick player. Now you got it. Because of the blue turban, hopefully you've got it by this point in the semester, that's Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. And he is from India, and he's a Sikh. And of course he's non-Arab, he's Indian. But, do know this for the test, 250 million Islamic folks in India? Huh. And they're the minority? Here, this feels like an easy trivia question. That's the biggest minority population on planet Earth. You say that again. Muslims in India are the biggest minority population on planet Earth. 250 million of them, and they're the minority. That's 250 million? That's like bigger than 99% of all countries' populations. So, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, he's actually a Sikh. He's not Islamic at all. How about this guy? He's actually out of the picture now. But I don't think I've shown you the current president of Egypt, so maybe that's a hint. This is former President Hosni Mubarak of Egypt, the dictator who ran Egypt for about 3 decades. Okay, so he's Egyptian. That should help narrow the field for you. What do you think? Sunni or Shia? Obviously Sunni, and obviously Arab, as I've now pointed out. How about this person? Oh, another trick one because we're outside the region again. This is President Asif Zardari of Pakistan. Again, much like the Indonesian example, just take a wild stab because you don't know this for sure. But if you guessed Sunni, that would be a great hypothesis, and it would be correct. And of course, he's non-Arab. He's Pakistani. How about this person? Oh, well, we got it. Oh, you remember his name? Can you at least remember his holy title? That's right. He's an Ayatollah. The Ayatollah Khamenei of Iran. Side note, also an exam question. Ayatollah just means kind of religious cleric or priest. There are many Ayatollahs. I know I've said this before, but let me stress. There's not the Ayatollah. That's not like saying the president of Iran. No. He is an Ayatollah. He just happens to be the head person in Iran who is an Ayatollah, if that makes sense. Iran always has a religious figure is the head, the actual head of state. And so there will always be an Ayatollah that's in charge of Iran, as long as they keep their current system. But it's not a title that means like the head honcho. There are many Ayatollahs. So the Ayatollah Khamenei of Iran, what do you think he is, Sunni or Shia? You're probably getting it by now. He's Shia. If you're in Iran, you're probably Shia. And of course, you're also Persian, so non-Arab. Do we have anybody else? Oh, poor sadness. He's dead in hell now, too. This is, of course, Saddam Hussein of Iraq, former President Saddam Hussein, also former living Saddam Hussein of Iraq. Now, this is where it gets tricky, because Iraq, as I pointed out, is actually mostly Shia, like 60% Shia. But Saddam Hussein and his crew were Sunni. And so they were a minority within Iraq who ruled with an iron fist and crushed both the Kurds and the Shias, and it's one of the reasons why he got his ass overthrown and killed. And he is Arab descent. And I think maybe this is the last one. Feels a little tricky, but you probably know him by now. That, of course, is Prime Minister Recep Erdogan of Turkey. Sunni or Shia? You got it. He's a Sunni. And Arab or non-Arab? No, he's non-Arab. He's a Turk. He's the president of Turkey. I'm the Prime Minister of Turkey. He's Turk. That's not Arab. Oh, I'm sorry. We still have one more because this guy's in the hot seat in today's world. If you don't know who he is, let me go ahead and throw it to you. President Bashar al-Assad. This is the guy that's in charge of Syria and overseeing the killing of his own people. He cannot possibly last in office the rest of this, the next year. I predict he's going to be out by 2013. And what is his affiliation? Here's where it gets really tricky. He is a tricky one, I won't lie, so know him for the exam. He actually will count as Shia, even though technically he's not. He's Alawite. And an Alawite is a subsect of Shia, but it's that strain of Islam. So therefore, he has stronger ties to his buddies over in Iran, and indeed, Iran is his greatest ally in the region. And now, maybe this makes sense why. It's a kind of religious affiliation, because he's Arab. That's what's so tricky about him. Him and his family are Arab, but they are kind of Shia, and they're actually a minority in Syria. Shias are not the majority, but much like Saddam Hussein was a minority dictator in Iraq, the whole Assad family is in a minority, in a Shia minority, but they're the dictators in charge of a predominantly Arab Sunni Syria. Thus, the internal conflict there as well. This all makes sense now? I hope so. That'll do it for now. I'm sure this went for like 10 hours. So we'll have a pretty sizable flash quiz on this, and all those world leaders you'll see in the world leader exam, or at least some of them. And you'll have to know the affiliation of all of their Arab, non-Arab, Sunni, Shia to help you understand the greater differences of the Middle East. So we'll stop for now, and the next section of the Middle East will deal specifically and only with the Israeli-Palestinian situation because, whew, that one's enough for one sitting. Party on.